Hey guys, tonight we step inside a world where the night air bites harder than any insult your neighbor could hurl, where frost clings to the inside of your window like a jealous ghost, and every creak of the rafters above sounds like the sky itself settling in for winter. You're lying there in the dim half-light, staring at your ceiling of rough-hewn beams, and you can almost feel the frost creeping down from the thatch. Outside, the world is a silent sheet of white, the kind of stillness that tricks you into thinking nothing dangerous can happen until you realize the cold doesn't need to roar to kill. You probably won't survive this if you just lie still. But then again, you're not the type to give in that easily, are you? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir beneath your blanket, if you can call it that, a coarse, scratchy slab of wool that's more enthusiasm than actual insulation. It's early morning, but the sun hasn't yet cleared the tree line, and the air inside your cottage feels like it's been borrowed from the far side of an ice floe. Each exhale sends a faint puff into the room, curling upward until it vanishes into the shadows above. The frost has crept down the wooden posts, forming pale lace that would be pretty if it weren't a sign you're slowly turning into a popsicle. The day starts with a choice that's more dangerous than it sounds. Do you get up now, let all the heat your body has hoarded spill into the open air, or do you stay under the blanket and risk becoming too chilled to move later? Historians still argue whether most peasants in your time simply hunkered down through such mornings, conserving every scrap of warmth, or whether necessity drove them to rise at first light. Frostbite be damned. You can smell the faint remains of last night's fire, an earthy, bitter scent that makes you wish you'd stacked more wood, or at least remembered to rake the embers before sleep took you. A mainstream historical fact here. In many parts of medieval Europe, especially in the harsher climates of northern England and Scandinavia, homes were built without chimneys until well into the late Middle Ages. Smoke simply drifted upward through a hole in the roof, meaning that while you could heat the place, you'd also be sharing your space with a haze thick enough to make you cough yourself awake. You can't decide if that's a blessing or a curse. A quirky truth about mornings like this? Sometimes, the frost indoors was so thick that people scratched their names into it on the rafters. Yes, you could graffiti your own house in ice. You glance up at the glimmering beams, wondering if you should etch a little message to your future self. Still alive. Barely. The silence outside is deceptive. In winter, the soundscape changes, snow muffles footsteps, wind cuts away smaller noises, and the usual hum of human and animal life is subdued. You hear only the occasional creak of wood adjusting to the cold, and somewhere, far away, a crow making a sound like a rusty hinge. Your toes curl under the blanket, seeking some patch of warmth from your own legs. No luck. You turn over, peering toward the low table where last night's bread still sits wrapped in cloth. It's frozen stiff now, and you know you'll have to thaw it somehow before eating, or risk chipping a tooth. You think about what's ahead today, fetching water that might be more ice than liquid, tending to animals whose breath will hang in the barn air like low fog, and maybe, if you're lucky, finding some small patch of sunlight to stand in before it disappears behind clouds again. Your breath is a metronome, slow and steady, but each inhalation scrapes cold air into your lungs, making you cough lightly. You pull the wool up to your chin and try not to think about the stories of people who never woke after nights like this. There's comfort in routine, though, and your mind runs over the same inventory every morning. Blanket intact, fire dead but not lost, roof holding, no suspicious dripping that would mean a thaw has turned the thatch into a sponge. You hear a faint scuffle outside, probably a fox sniffing around for scraps. The animals survive in their own ways, most better adapted to this weather than you. Still, there's a strange solidarity in knowing every living thing right now is just trying to hold its warmth close, same as you. The sky outside lightens slightly, more grey than gold, and you know the decision is coming. You can't stay in bed forever. Somewhere in your bones, You feel the tug of the day, even if your muscles protest. You push the blanket aside slowly, each movement letting in another inch of sharp air. Your feet hit the cold-packed floor, and it's like stepping on iron. You wince, but there's no time to dwell. The cottage is small, but it takes effort to move in this kind of chill, as though the air itself wants to keep you still. You shuffle toward the hearth, crouching low to stir the ashes. The embers are barely there, a few red eyes blinking up at you from beneath the grey. With practiced fingers, you coax them into life, feeding them with twigs before daring to add anything larger. This is a small victory heat, even a little, means the day can truly begin. And yet, part of you still longs to crawl back under that blanket, to sink into the scratchy embrace and pretend the world beyond your cottage walls doesn't exist until spring. But you know better. Winter is long, and surviving it means small, stubborn acts of will, repeated over and over until the thaw. You blow gently on the embers, watching them glow brighter, the warmth creeping into your hands, and think, another day alive. That's enough for now. You rummage through the corner chest, a squat, splintery thing that creaks like an old man's knees, searching for anything that could be coaxed into becoming warmth. There's no tidy stack of winter gear here, just an unpredictable heap of cast-offs, mended scraps, and the occasional relic that probably belonged to someone you never met but still have to thank for its existence. Your fingers close around a pair of hose, patched so many times they resemble a quilt more than clothing. The wool is stiff from disuse, but you shake them out anyway, sending a puff of dust into the cold air. You start layering. First the hose, then another set if you can find one, even if they're mismatched and one leg sags lower than the other. A tunic follows, its elbows worn to a shine, and you eye the pile for something more. A wool hood turns up, faded to the color of old pond water, but lined with a surprising thickness that speaks of someone's careful handiwork. You remember hearing that in certain regions, sumptuary laws once forbade common folk from wearing high-quality cloth, reserving finer wools and dyes for the upper classes. A mainstream historical fact. In 14th century England, the 1360 Statute of Apparel spelled out exactly who could wear what based on their social rank, which of course didn't stop anyone from accidentally acquiring something nicer through trade, inheritance, or the occasional shady bargain. You pull the hood over your head, and the instant sensation is that your ears have just been forgiven for some unknown sin. The wind's bite softens, even indoors. As you work, you find a length of cloth you're fairly certain was once a curtain. It's thin but long, so you wrap it around your torso like a makeshift sash, tucking the ends tight so they won't flap if you have to step outside. There's a quirky trick here that no one writes about in grand histories. Sometimes villagers would even wear old grain sacks, cutting armholes and calling it a tunic. Ugly. Absolutely. Effective? Surprisingly so. You glance at the feed sack hanging near the door and make a mental note that it might become your last resort. Historians still argue whether peasants typically dressed in as many layers as possible all day, or whether they kept some pieces dry for sleeping to avoid waking up in damp clothes. The practicality of both approaches is obvious. One keeps you moving without freezing, the other makes the night more bearable, but you suspect it often came down to how much a person actually owned. Your hands are next. You slip them into a pair of woolen mittens, so shapeless you can't tell if there's a designated right or left. The thumbs point in vaguely the same direction, which is good enough. They smell faintly of smoke, and you realize they must have been hung near the hearth last season. That scent is oddly reassuring, a reminder that fires have kept you alive before, and will again. The final piece is a cloak you inherited from your uncle, who himself had probably inherited it from someone else. It's heavier than it looks, the weave tight enough that you can feel the difference immediately. You drape it over your shoulders, and the weight alone makes you feel safer, as though it's pressing the cold back a few inches. The hem brushes the tops of your boots well, your boots in the generous sense, more leather wrap than structured footwear. You glance at your reflection in the sliver of polished metal hanging on the wall. You look like a walking bundle of other people's laundry. But warmth trumps pride. And besides, no one's going to judge you for fashion when they're busy not freezing to death themselves. Stepping back from the chest, you notice how your breath feels different, less like it's being snatched away with each exhale. Layering does that. It traps little pockets of your own heat and keeps them prisoner. You flex your fingers inside the mittens and feel that faint glow returning. It's tempting to stand here and enjoy it, but you know that cold seeps through eventually. The trick is to keep moving until you're sure you've got enough heat stored in your body to survive the next pause. You glance at the door and think about the short walk to the barn. Even layered like this, that first gust outside is going to sting. Still, the knowledge that you've built your own little fortress of fabric gives you courage. Somewhere in the rafters above, a drop of melted frost lands on your shoulder. It soaks into the cloak but doesn't chill you immediately, which feels like a minor victory. You tuck the hood tighter under your chin, pat the layers as though checking armor, and think of all the others through the centuries who've done the same, preparing to face another day in the grip of winter. The thought is oddly comforting. You're part of a long, unbroken line of stubborn survivors, all bundled in mismatched scraps, all ignoring the wind's invitation to give up. And as you step toward the door, you feel it, that tiny, defiant warmth blooming under the layers you've built, your quiet rebellion against the cold. You push open the cottage door, and the cold outside doesn't so much greet you as slap you, a sharp, crystalline force that finds the tiniest gaps in your layered defenses. Your eyes water instantly, not from sentiment but from air so frigid it feels like it's filing your tear ducts smooth. You take a slow breath, tasting the metallic edge that always seems to ride in with deep winter, and step carefully toward the barn. It's not far, just a few dozen paces, but in weather like this, even that short stretch feels like an expedition across a frozen tundra. The snow crunches beneath your boots, brittle and dry, and your breath billows ahead like the smoke from last night's fire. You tug the cloak tighter, but the real warmth you're seeking isn't in the barn walls, it's in the creatures waiting inside. Sleeping with livestock isn't romantic. It's not a pastoral painting of happy farmers and cheerful cows. It's a practical, sometimes smelly and occasionally noisy method of survival that's as old as animal domestication itself. A mainstream historical fact. In many medieval European homes, particularly in the colder northern regions, people often shared living space or at least a connected structure with their animals. The animal's body heat helped raise the ambient temperature by a few precious degrees, enough to make the difference between surviving the night and waking as a cautionary tale. You reach the barn door, fingers stiff even inside the mittens, and wrestle it open. The warmth hits you immediately, not tropical, not even comfortable, by any modern standard, but a noticeable step up from the razor, cold outside. The air is thick with the earthy scent of hay, manure, and the faint sweetness of stored grain. The cow in the nearest stall lifts her head, big brown eyes blinking slowly as if to say, "You again?" You move closer, letting the bulk of her flank shield you from a draft sneaking through a gap in the boards. The steady huff of her breath is oddly calming, a reminder that she too is enduring the same season, only with the built-in advantage of a heavy hide. A quirky tidbit: people in some rural communities swore that the warmth of certain animals was better than others, and not just by size. Horses were considered good companions in the cold because of their constant low-level movement, while sheep were valued for the dual benefit of warmth and the occasional midnight snack of lanolin-scented wool to nibble, for reasons lost to history, but which you're not about to try. Cows, like the one beside you now, were favored for their calm demeanor and the steady heat they radiated. You lower yourself to sit on the hay-strewn floor near the stall. The cow shifts slightly, leaning closer, and you can feel the radiant warmth through your layers. It's not immediate comfort, but it's a slow, creeping kind of heat that settles into your bones. Historians still argue whether peasants made a deliberate habit of sleeping right against their animals, or if it was more a matter of circumstance: overcrowded space, unheated sleeping quarters, or the need to guard valuable livestock from thieves. The goats in the corner are already awake, picking at the hay as if they've been waiting for an audience. Their breath makes little clouds in the air adding to the barn's ghostly haze. You think about curling up here for a few hours, but the hard floor would punish you for it later. Even so, you can't deny the appeal. A shared survival pact between you and the animals. The muffled quiet of the barn wraps around you. Outside, the wind might be sharpening its knives, but in here, time slows. You hear the steady rhythm of chewing, the occasional soft snort, the faint creak of wood shifting in the cold. It's not silence, it's a chorus of small, living noises that promise life is still ticking forward. You find yourself inching closer to the cow again, the side of your cloak brushing her flank. She doesn't move away. That shared warmth is a currency out here, and you're both willing to spend it. In that moment, you realize you've stopped shivering not because the barn is truly warm, but because you've found a place where the cold can't reach you quite as easily. When you finally stand to leave, the return to open air feels like betrayal. The cold sinks its claws back in, harsher after the barn's muted shelter. Still, you carry a pocket of that warmth with you, hidden under your layers, proof that survival in winter isn't always about fighting the cold, it's about borrowing heat wherever you can find it, even if it means sharing space with a cow who's probably more dignified than you are right now. You step back into the cottage with that faint trace of barn warmth still clinging to you, though it's already fading like a dream you can't quite recall. The hearth has woken a little since you coaxed it earlier, but it's nowhere near ready to heat the whole space. Instead, you make for the straw mattress in the corner, a humble but surprisingly strategic part of your nightly survival plan. It's not much to look at: a lumpy bed, stuffed with last season's straw. Its linen tick stained from years of use, but in the cold, it serves a purpose beyond mere sleeping. A mainstream historical fact: straw bedding wasn't just common in medieval Europe, it was vital. It provided insulation from the cold ground, which otherwise would drain your body heat as efficiently as if you'd been lying on a slab of ice. Peasants often refreshed the straw every few months, though in lean years it could be stretched far longer, with the result that the bed might smell faintly of hay, or strongly of whatever small creatures had claimed it for their own. You sink onto the straw and immediately feel for the hot spot, sometimes literal, sometimes imagined, that lingers from the embers buried under ash nearby. Last night, before bed, you tucked a few glowing coals into a clay pot and slid it under the mattress's edge, a quirky practice you learned from your grandmother, who swore it kept her warmer through the worst winters than any extra blanket. It's a dangerous trick, of course. Leave the embers too exposed and you could wake to find your bed smouldering, but with careful layering of ash and a watchful eye, it's a slow-release heat source that lasts until dawn. Historians still argue whether such underbed embers were a widespread habit or more of a regional oddity. Some claim the fire hazard made it rare, while others insist that desperate times outweighed cautious thinking. You like to believe you're carrying on a clever bit of forgotten tradition, though you also keep a bucket of water nearby, just in case cleverness decides to turn into foolishness at 3 in the morning. You wiggle deeper into the straw, letting it cradle your hips and shoulders. It's not exactly soft, the stalks have a way of poking in places you'd rather not mention, but the air between the layers warms quickly under your weight. You can hear faint rustles within the mattress, probably mice, though they keep to themselves. You're not in the mood for company that small. The mattress sits close enough to the hearth that you can stretch one foot toward the warmth, while the other remains insulated by straw. It's a balancing act, one you've perfected over countless winters. Too close to the fire and you wake with one side sweating. Too far, and you might as well be sleeping outside. You remember a story from your neighbor about a particularly harsh winter, when families would bury heated stones in the straw before lying down. The stones would radiate heat for hours, though the trick was finding a way to avoid burning your toes when you shifted in your sleep. You tried it once and woke yelping, a lesson learned quickly. The smell of straw mixed with faint wood smoke fills the air. It's a scent that might repulse someone used to perfumed bedding, but to you it's as familiar and comforting as the smell of baking bread. It smells like home, like survival. It smells like winter done right. The faint crackle of the hearth draws your gaze. the orange glow a silent partner in your nightly battle against frost. Your fingers brush the edge of the blanket folded nearby, knowing that when night comes, it will be layered over the straw, and any stored heat will be trapped beneath it. You've learned to see the bed not just as a place to rest, but as a heat retention device, a crude but effective thermal battery made from Earth's simplest materials. You roll to your side, the straw shifting beneath you with a sigh. In your mind, you can already feel the deeper cold of night pressing at the walls. But for now, here in this patch of warm straw, it feels very far away. This isn't luxury. It isn't even comfort in the modern sense. But it is enough to keep your body from stiffening, enough to let you rest, enough to see another dawn without frostbite claiming your toes. And in winter, enough is all you can ask for. You lift the heavy cloak from your shoulders and lay it over the straw bed, smoothing the folds so it covers as much surface as possible. Tonight, it will do double duty not just as a shield against wind on your back, but as an extra barrier between you and the cold. In a world without modern quilts or thick duvets, every layer matters. And cloaks, especially the better-made ones, are a peasant's portable survival kit. A mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, cloaks were among the most valuable pieces of personal clothing a person could own. Made of tightly woven wool, they were water-resistant to a surprising degree and could last decades with proper care. Cloaks were also a kind of social marker. Finer cloth and brighter dyes signaled wealth, while the darker, rougher versions, like yours, meant you belonged to the working class. They were too practical to be purely ornamental, and too necessary to be left hanging unused. You drape yours around yourself again, experimenting with the double wrap technique, first across your shoulders, then pulling the ends forward and crossing them snugly around your chest before tucking them under your arms. This turns it into a hybrid blanket and coat, trapping a layer of air close to your core. It's the kind of simple trick no one writes in fancy manuscripts, but every winter-hardened villager knows by heart. The wool is scratchy, but you've long since stopped noticing. The fibers trap tiny pockets of warmth almost instantly. Even the smell of the cloak, faintly smoky, faintly animal from its origins, feels reassuring, like you're wearing the memory of every fire you've ever sat beside. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind. Some cloaks were designed with built-in pockets or slits for carrying small loaves of bread or chunks of cheese. You imagine a medieval traveler pausing on a snowy road to fish a snack from their clothing and can't help but smile. Your cloak doesn't have such luxuries, but if you fold it right, you can tuck things inside spare mittens, a hot stone, or even a particularly cooperative chicken in an emergency. Historians still argue whether peasants truly slept in their cloaks every night during winter, or if they reserved them for the coldest spells. The argument seems pointless to you. When the temperature drops low enough to freeze the water in your bedside cup, anything that holds warmth is fair game. You settle onto the edge of the straw bed, cloak wrapped tight, feeling the way the fabric molds to your body. The weight is more than physical, it's psychological. Wearing it makes you feel like you have armor against the night, a silent assurance that you've done what you can to keep the frost at bay. The wind rattles the shutters, and you pull the hood up without thinking. It casts the world into a narrower view, a private tunnel of vision that keeps you focused on the fire and the small pool of light it throws. You know this is part of the trick, keeping your senses fooled into thinking the whole world is just this warm corner, not the icy expanse outside. You lean back, imagining the generations before you doing the same. Farmers, shepherds, carpenters, all relying on their cloaks as the last line of defense between themselves and the bitter dark. Somewhere out there, in another cottage or another century, someone else is doing exactly what you're doing now, cocooned in wool and stubborn hope. The thought carries its own warmth, and you let it settle over you as surely as the cloak itself. The night will come soon enough, but for now, you sit wrapped in this rough, heavy shield, feeling just for a moment almost invincible. The smell reaches you before the heat does a sweet, yeasty fragrance with a hint of damp grain and smoke. You know exactly what it means. Someone in the village is brewing ale. In winter, that's more than just a promise of drink. It's an open invitation to thaw your bones in the only place that can rival a hearth for warmth. You step outside, pulling your cloak tighter, and follow the scent. The air is bitter, your breath coming in white bursts, but the anticipation pulls you forward. The alehouse sits low to the ground, its timber frame and wattle walls huddled against the cold, as if it too is trying to stay warm. A mainstream historical fact: brewing wasn't just for large taverns. In many medieval communities, households or small alewives would brew in batches, often as part of the daily economy. Ale was safer to drink than untreated water, and the brewing process, boiling, fermenting, generated a surprising amount of heat. That heat was a side benefit you didn't waste in the dead of winter. When you push open the alehouse door, the warmth wraps around you like a thick blanket. It's not a polite kind of heat, it's humid, heavy, clinging to your face and seeping into your clothes. Steam rolls from a copper kettle in the corner, where a woman stirs the wort with a paddle almost as tall as she is. You sidle closer, not too close to be in the way, but close enough to feel the steam hit your skin. The grainy smell fills your lungs, the malty sweetness making you think of bread left to rise near a fire. A quirky little truth. Some people swore that standing in alehouse steam cured winter coughs, though it was probably just the relief of breathing something warmer than ice air for once. Historians still argue whether peasants sought out alehouse brewing days mainly for the drink or for the heat. The two were often intertwined. You'd arrive cold, warm yourself in the steam, sip from a communal cup, and leave with enough glow in your chest to last the walk home. You linger, pretending to be useful by fetching a bucket of water or moving sacks of malt. No one minds brewing is labor, and an extra set of hands, even chilled ones, earns its keep. The brewer's cat weaves between your legs, seeking warmth in reverse, and you laugh quietly as it almost trips you. The chatter inside is subdued, the kind of low murmur that comes from people conserving energy as much as they can. You catch fragments of talk, complaints about frozen well buckets, gossip about who's traded extra firewood for meat, a story about a goose that supposedly froze mid-flight. You're not sure you believe it, but in weather like this, almost anything seems possible. You watch the brewer lift the paddle, steam swirling in silver ribbons, and for a moment you imagine bottling this heat, corking it up to take home. But that's not how it works. Here, the warmth is communal, shared air, shared breath, shared survival. When the batch is set to rest, you know it's time to leave. The outside air hits harder after the alehouse's embrace, but the memory of that dense, fragrant heat stays with you, tucked somewhere under your layers. It's not just the temperature, it's the proof that even in the coldest season, there are pockets of warmth waiting to be found, if you know where to look. You return to the cottage with a little more life in your limbs, though the wind quickly tries to reclaim it. The thought of nightfall nudges your mind, the hour when even the bravest fires shrink back, and you have to rely on something less romantic but far more reliable: the simple, undeniable heat of human bodies. Your family is already inside, gathered near the hearth. The fire crackles low, casting a thin amber wash over the walls. Beds in winter are not solitary affairs here. They're strategic arrangements designed to keep every ounce of warmth where it belongs. A mainstream historical fact. In many parts of medieval Europe, it was common for entire families to sleep in the same bed during the coldest months, often without much modesty about it. Privacy was a luxury, but warmth was survival. Even travelers might share space with strangers if the alternative was freezing. Your bed isn't much more than a wide wooden frame stuffed with straw and covered in whatever cloth you can muster. But it's the people in it who make the real difference. You slip under the blanket, tucking yourself between your sister on one side and your youngest brother on the other. The warmth is immediate, less like a sudden blaze, and more like the slow rise of sun on a winter morning, creeping into your bones. A quirky tidbit. There's an old expression, three-dog night, that refers to using dogs for warmth, a phrase still floating around in some corners of the world today. Here, you don't have the dogs, but the idea is the same. You huddle close, arranging yourself so that as much surface area as possible is touching another person. It's less about comfort and more about mathematics, heat conserved through shared contact. Historians still argue whether peasants in this period truly enjoyed such sleeping arrangements or simply endured them. Romantic paintings might suggest cozy familial bonds, but you know the reality includes elbow jabs, midnight shuffling, and the occasional wrestling match over who's hogging the blanket. You shift slightly, making space where you can, and try not to breathe directly into anyone's face. The blanket itself is a patchwork, stitched from old tunics, worn linen, and whatever scraps could be spared. It's heavy enough to trap warmth, though the weight can be stifling if you wake in the middle of the night. The edges are tucked down along the sides, sealing the heat in like a lid on a cooking pot. Beneath it, the air is thick and warmer than anything outside the bed's edge. It doesn't take long for you to start feeling the subtle pulse of shared warmth, the way it moves and mingles. A shoulder against yours shifts, and the heat there deepens. A foot brushes your ankle, sending a warmer patch up your leg. You're all living radiators, each doing your part without words. You remember your grandmother telling you how, in her younger days, she once shared a bed with two other families during a particularly brutal winter. The cottage had no functioning hearth, so they layered blankets, cloaks, and themselves into one massive pile in the center of the room. We smelled like a barn, she'd laughed, but nobody froze. That's the unglamorous truth. You trade dignity for survival, and it's not a bad bargain. The fire pops, and you glance toward the hearth. A few embers blink lazily, but no one moves to tend them yet. The blanket's warmth makes you reluctant to break the seal of heat, even for the sake of adding fuel. That's the other secret here. Once you're in the bed, you avoid leaving unless it's an emergency. A cough rattles from the other side of the bed, muffled under the blanket. The air under here is warm but stale, carrying the smells of wool, sweat, and faintly of smoke clinging to your cloaks. You breathe it in without complaint. It's still preferable to the icy bite of air above the covers. There's a rhythm to winter nights like this. Heat rises and falls depending on how still everyone can stay, who rolls over, and whether the blanket shifts enough to let in a draft. You've learned to adjust without waking fully, pressing closer when the cold nips and easing away when the heat builds too much. You think of others in the village, old neighbors living alone, widows with no one to share their bed. Some keep small animals indoors for warmth, others simply layer themselves in every scrap they own and hope for a gentle night. But for you, the body heat here is more dependable than any fire, so long as no one slips away during the night. A few muffled laughs drift from under the blanket, sparked by some whispered joke. Even in this cramped warmth, there's a strange kind of comfort, a closeness that makes you feel more like a unit than a set of individuals. Winter does that. It presses people together until they either fight or become part of each other's survival. The blanket shifts again as someone adjusts their legs, and you feel the cold sneak in for just a second before it's banished by the returning seal of warmth. That fleeting chill is enough to remind you the real enemy is not the cold outside, but letting it creep in here. You close your eyes, the soft rustle of fabric and steady breathing all around you. This isn't comfort in the way the wealthy might imagine it. No feather mattresses, no silk sheets, but it's comfort enough to keep you alive. And when you wake, if you wake, it will be to the slow peeling away of the blanket, the reluctant parting of warmth, and the start of another day in the long truce you've made with winter. The cold always feels sharper when you've had to leave a warm bed, even one crowded with elbows and knees. Your feet meet the hard-packed floor with a jolt that runs all the way to your teeth. Still, there's a certain satisfaction in knowing your turn by the hearth is next. In this house, fireside sleeping is not a privilege taken lightly, it's a rotating system, an unspoken agreement that no one hogs the warmest spot 2 nights in a row. You drag your bedding toward the hearth, feeling the subtle rise in temperature as you get closer. The floor here is worn smooth by years of people doing the same thing, each one chasing the gentle heat radiating from the stonework. A mainstream historical fact. In many medieval homes, the hearth was the literal and symbolic center of life. It was the primary heat source, the place for cooking, and a gathering point for light when the sun vanished early in winter. Sleeping near it wasn't just convenient, it could mean the difference between waking up stiff from cold or waking up at all. Tonight, your body will be in that narrow strip where fire-warmed air meets the deeper chill of the room. The trick, you've learned, is not to get too close. Press in against the hearth and you risk waking with one side of your face dried out and the other still cold. Sleep too far away and you might as well still be on the far wall. You aim for the sweet spot where the heat wraps you like the memory of a summer day without scorching your skin. A quirky tidbit. In some villages, they'd actually assign fire watch sleepers, those lightest of sleepers who would wake at the slightest pop or hiss to take the hearthside spot. Their job wasn't just to enjoy the warmth, but to keep the fire alive through the night. You've been that person more than once, waking at odd hours to poke the coals or lay on another log. Historians still argue whether the hearth in peasant cottages was kept burning all night in most households or allowed to die down after the evening meal. Fuel scarcity played a big role. Keeping a fire alive meant using up valuable wood or peat, and not every family could afford that luxury. In your case, tonight is one of the lucky nights where enough fuel has been set aside for an overnight flame. You spread your cloak on the floor before unrolling your bedding. The cloak acts as insulation, keeping the cold from seeping up into your bones through the floor. Above you, the smoke curls lazily into the dim air, drawn toward the small opening in the roof. It's not enough to make you cough, but it's enough to make the room smell faintly of wood smoke and damp ash, a scent you've come to associate with security. You ease down onto your bedding, stretching your legs toward the hearth. The fire pops softly, sending up a brief spark that dances before fading. The glow washes over your face and arms, painting them gold in the otherwise grey light of the cottage. You feel the warmth seeping through your layers, undoing the morning's chill. The others are already settling into their own spaces farther from the hearth, muttering jokes about how you'd better not roll too close and burn your toes off. You grin in the half-light, knowing they'll take their turn soon enough. As the night deepens, the fire becomes a quiet companion, its shifting flames drawing your eyes even when you're too drowsy to keep them open for long. You drift in and out of light sleep, waking whenever the heat dips, your hand instinctively reaching for the small pile of kindling at your side. You add it sparingly, mindful of tomorrow's supply. There's a certain magic in this arrangement, knowing you're the night's caretaker of warmth. When you feed the fire, you're not just doing it for yourself. You're keeping the cold from swallowing the whole room, maintaining a thin but vital barrier between everyone here and the winter outside. At one point, a log shifts, sending a soft shower of sparks up the chimney hole. You catch the faint hiss of melting frost from the roof above. Somewhere out there the wind prowls, but here the flames stand guard. You curl deeper into your blanket, the heat lulling you toward heavier sleep. You'll wake again, you always do, but for now you let yourself sink into the rare comfort of being both warm and safe. It's your turn by the hearth tonight, and you intend to make the most of it. By the time morning frost creeps across the shutters again, you're already thinking about the small arsenal of heat traps you've come to depend on, none more satisfying than the hot stone trick. It's simple, deceptively so, and it's saved your fingers and toes more than once when the nights felt endless. You start by picking through the pile of river stones near the hearth, looking for the ones with just the right heft. Too small, and they lose heat before you've even settled into bed. Too large, and you risk burning yourself if you misjudge the temperature. A mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, particularly in colder regions, people often used bed warmers, metal pans with long handles, filled with hot coals or stones, slipped under bedding before sleep. For peasants without such fine tools, the riverstone method was the more practical and affordable alternative. Once chosen, you nestle the stones near the heart of the fire, watching their dull grey skin slowly darken and pick up a faint glow. The trick is patience. If you rush and snatch them out too early, they'll barely take the edge off the cold. Leave them too long, and you might end up explaining to your neighbors how you managed to scorch a hole in your only blanket. A quirky tidbit you once heard from a traveling peddler. Some folks swore by wrapping hot stones in fresh bread dough before tucking them into bed. By morning, you'd wake to both warm feet and half-baked bread. You're not entirely sure if this is genius or lunacy, but given how desperate winter can get, you wouldn't dismiss it entirely. Historians still argue whether this kind of bed warming was a nightly ritual or saved only for the worst cold snaps. You suspect it depended on the fuel supply and the willingness to risk a bit of smouldering cloth. When the stones are ready, you roll them onto a thick scrap of linen, folding the cloth over itself until there's enough padding to prevent burns. The heat seeps through instantly, warming your palms even through the layers. You carry them carefully to your bed, slipping them under the straw at knee level. The warmth starts to radiate upward almost immediately, a creeping, delicious spread that feels like it's melting the stiffness from your legs. You've learned the placement is key. Too far down the bed, and the heat never reaches your core. Too close, and you'll wake sweating in the middle of the night. Tonight, you nestle them just below your knees, letting the warmth flow upward without overheating your chest. The others glance at you from their own corners, their eyes holding a flicker of envy. You know they'll all be raiding the Riverstone pile before long, just as you did. That's the quiet economy of winter survival trade. Borrow, imitate. No one claims ownership of a good idea for long. You stretch out, pulling the blanket over your shoulders. The hot stones turn the bed into something almost luxurious, the kind of heat you imagine the wealthy enjoy without thought. Your toes, usually icy for hours after lying down, thaw within minutes. The difference is almost enough to make you forget the draft creeping along the wall. As you drift towards sleep, you listen to the faint hiss of cooling stone under straw, the sound barely louder than a sigh. Outside, the wind claws at the shutters, but here, under your blanket, there's a steady pulse of warmth keeping you anchored. It's a fragile barrier, but it's enough, another small, clever rebellion against the cold that thinks it owns the night. You've learned over the years a surprising amount of your heat escapes from the top of your head and the tips of your fingers. It's one of those truths you can feel long before you ever hear it stated, and on the bitterest nights, you notice it the moment you let your hands or scalp go uncovered. Tonight, you decide to give those neglected extremities the attention they deserve. There's an old wool cap hanging by the hearth, its shape more lumpy than round, the color somewhere between smoke and ash. You tug it over your head until it nearly covers your eyebrows. The fabric is dense and faintly itchy, but the instant it settles into place, the air inside the cap warms with each breath you release. You remember being told by an elderly neighbor that losing heat from your head was like leaving the door wide open and wondering why the room's cold. You didn't fully understand it then, but nights like this prove her point. For your hands, there's the pair of mittens you mended last week, the seams reinforced with thick, uneven stitches. They're not beautiful, but they're good enough to stop the cold from biting every time you stir the fire or fetch water. In the absence of mittens, people here have been known to wrap strips of cloth around their hands and wrists, almost like bandages, to trap a cushion of air close to the skin. You tried once and found it worked better than you expected so long as you didn't need to pick up anything delicate. It's worth noting that in some fishing communities along the coast, winter headgear was made from felted wool so tightly pressed that wind and snow couldn't penetrate it. The same idea has reached the inland villages in smaller ways, caps and mittens that serve as both shield and insulation. You like to imagine some distant ancestor working out this principle the hard way, returning from a long, freezing walk with a newfound respect for head coverings. Another small practice comes to mind: tucking your hands under your arms while you rest, keeping them against the warmest parts of your torso. It's an instinctive gesture, but also one that works remarkably well. Combined with a cap, it turns your own body into a furnace that circulates heat instead of letting it drift away. Sitting near the hearth, you test the arrangement. The fire is low but steady, sending out just enough warmth to make the air in this corner of the cottage bearable. Your mittens and cap lock in what's left, so, even when a faint draught sneaks through the wallboards, it doesn't sting as sharply. There's a story you once heard in the alehouse, probably exaggerated, that a shepherd survived a night on the open hills in midwinter by wrapping his head and hands in fresh sheepskin, sleeping with his flock until dawn. You're not about to try it, but you can't help admiring the stubborn resourcefulness. Survival often comes down to using whatever you have on hand, literally and figuratively. As the evening deepens, you notice the difference in your own body. The heat from the hearth reaches your face, your capped head traps it, and your mittened hands stay flexible instead of stiffening into claws. It's not comfort as the wealthy would know it, but it's a quiet kind of victory, turning small pieces of cloth into fortifications that help you meet the night on equal terms. You lean back against the wall, listening to the slow crackle of wood, and think about the simple logic of it all. Keep the head warm, keep the hands covered, and the rest of you will follow. Tonight, it feels like one more secret in your growing collection of ways to keep the cold at bay, not with grand gestures, but with small, deliberate acts that add up to another morning alive. You've patched the gaps in your clothes, but even the thickest wool won't help much if the wind keeps slipping through the walls. Tonight, you turn your attention to the cottage itself. The cold here isn't only an outdoor thing, it sneaks inside like a thief, finding every crack between the timber and the daub, every knothole in the boards. You can feel it brushing the back of your neck when you sit too close to the north wall. You gather what the countryside offers in abundance: moss, rags, straw, and handfuls of dry grass left over from thatching season. Your aim is to choke off those tiny invasions of air before they have a chance to drain the warmth you've fought so hard to build. In your village, this chore is so common that people speak of dressing the house for winter, the way they talk about dressing themselves. In regions farther north, where winters stretch out for months, households would sometimes coat the inside of their walls with an extra layer of clay mixed with animal hair, effectively giving the building its own winter coat. Here, it's not quite that elaborate, but the idea's the same. Keep the air from moving where it shouldn't. You've heard older neighbors say that the difference can be felt within a single night, and you believe them. You start with the biggest offenders, the gaps at the window frame, where the shutter never quite meets the sill. You pack in wads of moss, pressing it deep into the seams, then wedge strips of worn linen over the top for good measure. The moment you step back, you notice how the draft at your ankles vanishes. It's a small victory, but it makes you grin in the dim light. Next, you crouch by the door, where the warped wood leaves a sliver of daylight in the bottom corner. It's a treacherous little gap too low to see easily, but big enough for the night wind to slither through. You push a twist of straw and rags into the space, then stomp it gently with your boot to keep it in place. There's an old story in the village about a miser who refused to waste cloth on plugging wall gaps, only to have his own breath freeze in his beard one night while he slept. Whether or not it's true, it's a reminder that warmth is often built from the smallest acts, the ones so dull you hardly notice them until you stop doing them and pay the price. Once the gaps are sealed, you notice the air inside feels calmer, less restless. The flames in the hearth don't flicker as much, and the smoke rises in a steady stream instead of swirling unpredictably. It's subtle, but in winter, subtle changes can mean a world of difference. You sit back on your heels, wiping your hands on your tunic, and let yourself enjoy the feeling of having outwitted the cold, at least for now. No matter how fierce the wind gets outside, you've made it work harder to find you. And in the constant game between warmth and frost, every little edge counts. The animals have been restless all afternoon, stamping in their stalls and shifting the hay around until it rustles like dry waves. You take it as your signal to make the climb up to the hayloft before darkness falls. The barn's upper level is more than just storage, it's the warmest perch in your world on a freezing night. The ladder creaks under your weight, each rung polished smooth by generations of hands and boots. You poke your head above the loft floor and inhale. The smell up here is rich, sun-dried grass, dust, and the faint sweetness of grain. It's warmer too, not by much, but enough that your breath doesn't curl quite as thick in the air. That warmth comes from below, from the steady breathing of cows and goats, their bodies turning feed into heat that rises and pools beneath the rafters. In mountain villages, people have been known to build entire living quarters above their animals, letting that animal heat seep through the floorboards into their sleeping space. Here, it's a little less formal, but the effect is the same nature's central heating, powered by hooves and chewing jaws. You shuffle across the loft and find the flattest patch of hay, kicking aside a few hard stems. The layer is deep enough to cushion you from the wooden planks, and as you settle down, you can feel the warmth bleeding upward into your back. It's not immediate, but it's steady, like leaning against a sun-warmed wall at the end of the day. One of the goats coughs below, and you glance through a crack in the floor to see them clustered together, heads low. You can hear the cow shifting her weight, the swish of her tail, the quiet rhythm of her breathing. The sounds make the space feel alive in a way your cottage never does, warmer in spirit as well as temperature. There's a bit of superstition in the village about hayloft sleeping. Some say it invites strange dreams, that the scent of hay draws the mind into wandering paths where you might see things you shouldn't. Others insist it's the best sleep you'll ever have. You've done it enough to know the truth lies somewhere in between. As you lie back, the loft's close air wraps around you. It smells faintly of last summer's sun, the kind of warmth you can almost taste. You pull your cloak tight, though you know you won't need it as much here. The loft traps air better than your cottage, and with the animals below, it's as if you've stolen a pocket of summer to hide in for the night. The only challenge is the dust it tickles your throat if you shift too much, and you've learned to move slowly to avoid sending clouds into the air. Still, you'd take a scratchy cough over frostbitten toes any day. You let your eyes drift toward the roof beams above, where frost has formed in fine lace patterns, but hasn't yet dripped through. If you're lucky, you'll be awake before the morning thaw sends cold droplets down into your hair. If you're not, well, you've survived worse. With the hay beneath you and the soft orchestra of animal noises below, the cold feels far away, as if winter has been paused for a few hours. It's not gone, you can still see your breath in the thin light, but it's been pushed back, kept at the edges of your little borrowed refuge. And in a season like this, that's the closest thing to comfort you can hope for. The cold gnaws at your bones faster when your belly is empty, so tonight you plan ahead. You know that if you eat something heavy and rich before crawling into bed, the warmth will linger in your body far longer. It's not a luxury, it's one of the oldest winter tricks you've ever learned. You move toward the hearth with a small clay pot, the smell of simmering stew already curling through the air. The mix is simple: barley thick enough to stand a spoon in, scraps of salted pork, and root vegetables that have survived the frost in the cellar. Fat glistens on the surface, catching the flicker of the firelight. You've been saving a piece of pork rind for a night like this, knowing it will melt into the pot and give the whole meal that deep, comforting heft. It's a practice you've seen in every home in the village. Eat something with fat before bed, and your body will burn it slowly through the night, keeping you warmer than any thin soup could. In colder climates, it's even more pronounced. Travelers returning from the far north speak of eating slabs of salted fish or chunks of cheese, so rich they'd make a summer stomach groan, all for the sake of enduring the cold. You remember one winter when the entire household survived for a week on nothing but oat porridge laced with melted tallow. It wasn't pleasant, but it worked. The warmth from that heavy meal would sink into your limbs like slow-spreading fire, carrying you through until the morning thaw. A friend once told you about an old superstition. Eating certain foods at night, like garlic or onions, was believed to guard against the cold humours that crept into the body during sleep. You're not convinced by the theory, but you'll admit a steaming bowl of onion broth feels like a shield when the frost is rattling the shutters. The stew tonight tastes even better than you'd hoped. The pork has softened until it nearly falls apart. The carrots have turned sweet, and the barley has soaked up every bit of fat from the pot. You savour each spoonful slowly, letting the heat fill your mouth before swallowing. The warmth spreads down your throat, blooming in your chest, then flowing outward to your hands and feet. Outside, The wind's voice grows sharper, but it doesn't matter now. You've stoked your body's inner fire, and that kind of heat doesn't fade quickly. You sip the last of the broth, licking the wooden spoon clean. When you finally lie down, the difference is immediate. Instead of curling into yourself to trap whatever scraps of warmth you can, you stretch out, feeling the steady pulse of heat moving from your core to your fingertips. The blanket above you is the same, the room just as cold as it was an hour ago, but your body feels like it's holding on to a secret the night can't steal. As your eyes close, you think of tomorrow's meal, whether it will be as rich or if you'll have to make do with something leaner. Winter is a long game, and every mouthful counts. But for now, you've bought yourself a few more hours of comfort, and in this season, that's a victory worth savoring. The stew from last night still warms you from the inside, but as the frost creeps back into the corners of the cottage, your mind drifts to an old debate that's run through the village for as long as you can remember. Should you wear wool right against your skin, or keep to layered linen beneath and wool on top? Both camps are convinced they're right. The wool-first folk say nothing traps heat like thick, oily fibers, that the lanolin itself wards off damp and chill. The linen loyalists argue that wool next to the skin feels like sleeping inside a sack of nettles, and that a smooth underlayer is better for comfort and preventing sweat from chilling you later. You've tried both, and the truth is, each has its moments. This morning, you decide to experiment again. You pull on a wool tunic without the usual linen shift underneath. The roughness is immediate, your shoulders itch where the seams brush against them, but the warmth is undeniable. It's like stepping into a personal microclimate, the air inside the fabric heating up with every movement. In places where the wool rests directly on your skin, you can feel the difference within minutes. Elsewhere in the countryside, this question has taken on almost the air of ritual. In some market towns, autumn fairs even feature merchants loudly proclaiming the superiority of one method over the other, turning cloth stalls into miniature battlegrounds of opinion. One shepherd once told you that he wore nothing but wool from neck to toe every winter for 20 years, and swore he'd never caught a chill. You weren't sure whether to believe him or admire his stubbornness. You remember hearing about certain monastic orders that insisted their members wear rough wool as a sign of humility and endurance. That might be fine for the devout, but for you, warmth is the real virtue. By midday, you decide to swap to your usual linen underlayer before your skin rebels entirely. As you peel off the wool, you notice a faint steam rising from it in the cold air, a reminder of how much heat it was holding close to you. The linen feels cool at first, but the smoothness is a relief. Layering the wool tunic back over it gives you the best of both worlds, the warmth without the scrape. There's an unspoken wisdom in having both kinds of garments at hand. Linen is lighter, better for active days when you're moving enough to generate heat yourself. Wool is for stillness, for nights by the fire or long walks through snow when the wind feels like it's trying to carve the bones out of you. The wealthy might have wardrobes full of both, tailored and dyed, but even a peasant with one of each can outwit winter by knowing when to use them. As evening falls, you settle near the hearth, fingers idly stroking the texture of your sleeve. It's a small thing, choosing which fabric touches your skin first, but on nights like this, it's the kind of choice that can tip the balance between restless shivering and a deep, uninterrupted sleep. And if you've learned anything, it's that winter survival often comes down to the smallest, most personal decisions no one else can make for you. By the time the last traces of daylight have drained from the sky, the cold has deepened into something that demands movement. You know better than to simply sit by the fire all evening. That kind of stillness lets the frost creep into your bones no matter how many layers you've piled on. Tonight, you work until the last possible moment, using your own muscles as a furnace. You start with the woodpile, hauling logs from the small shed to stack near the hearth. Each trip forces you into the sharp air, your breath pluming out like smoke. The ache in your arms isn't unpleasant, it's the ache of blood moving fast, of heat kindling from within. In the fields, labourers call this earning your warmth, and they mean it literally. In some rural communities, people intentionally save heavy chores for late in the day during winter, just to carry that warmth into the night. Hauling water, splitting firewood, even threshing grain in a sheltered barn, it's not just work, it's strategy. You've seen older farmers step out into the yard to stamp and stretch before bed, muttering that the only thing worse than a frozen floor is frozen joints come morning. After the wood is stacked, you sweep the cottage floor, not just for tidiness, but to keep dust and dirt from dulling the air near your bed. The brisk strokes keep your shoulders loose, and your palms tingle with heat despite the chill that seeps through the door. You remember a neighbor who swore by sleeping on the sweat, working hard enough right before bed that you could still feel the glow in your skin as you drifted off. It sounded unpleasant when you were younger, but now you understand that the heat trapped under your clothes doesn't care whether it came from a roaring fire or your own back-breaking effort. The trick, of course, is knowing when to stop. Work too long, and you'll start sweating through your layers, leaving you damp and vulnerable once you lie down. Tonight, you finish just shy of that point, breathing hard but dry, the air around you feeling almost warm by contrast. As you settle on your bedding, cloak draped over your shoulders, you can feel the lingering hum of movement in your muscles. It's a quiet kind of satisfaction knowing you've banked enough of your own heat to carry you into the first hours of the night. In the constant tug-of-war between fire and frost, sometimes you are the fire. The light from the hearth is fading into that deep, honey-colored glow that comes just before the logs collapse into embers. This is the time of evening when the shadows grow long enough to crowd the corners, and you begin to weigh whether you can coax a little more heat from what's left of the fire without dipping into tomorrow's wood. But there's another trick for these hours, one that doesn't involve feeding the flames at all, leaning into the steady company of candlelight. You've gathered every stub of tallow candle in the cottage over the past few days, some barely an inch tall, others fat enough to stand on their own. Tonight, you place them all on the small table near the bed, clustering them so their heat pools into a single, gentle wave. It's a modest thing, but you can feel the warmth when you hold your hands above them. In a space as small as yours, that faint rise in temperature can be just enough to take the sting out of the air. In towns, it's common to see wealthier homes lit with beeswax candles, their sweet scent filling the room as they burn, but tallow is what most peasants rely on. Rendered from animal fat, it burns with a smoky edge and leaves a greasy residue along the wick. Not pleasant, perhaps, but in winter, no one's turning it away. A neighbor once told you that she used to burn her tallow candles inside clay bowls to trap the heat, then carry the warmed bowl to her bed. You tried it one winter and found it works well enough, though the smell tends to linger in your blankets for days afterward. There's a bit of folklore about candles, too. How a circle of them could ward off the cold spirits that slip through windows after midnight. Whether that's true or just a fireside story, there's something to be said for the way their light makes a room feel more alive. Without them, the darkness presses in closer. With them, the air seems to push back. You arrange the candles in a rough ring, using bits of melted tallow to anchor the smaller ones in place so they won't tip. Soon, the tabletop glows like a miniature hearth. Shadows dance along the walls, the flicker creating the illusion of movement, as if the room itself were breathing. The warmth isn't enough to heat the whole space, but here, within arm's reach, it's noticeable. You lean forward, letting your face hover above the ring of light. The air carries that faint animal tang, undercut with the charred scent of singed wick. Not the perfume of wealth, but the perfume of survival. In some coastal villages, families have been known to cluster their candles in lantern boxes with mirrored panels, both to reflect the light farther and to trap more heat. You think about building one someday, though you'd have to barter for the glass. For now, the simple arrangement is enough. You sit by the table, cloak pulled tight, and hold your hands near the flames. Your fingertips thaw first, then the backs of your hands, the warmth creeping up into your wrists. You let it linger, breathing slow, listening to the faint hiss of tallow as it softens and feeds the flames. The rest of the room is still. The only movement the occasional pop from the hearth and the lazy bend of candlelight swaying in an unseen draught. It's almost hypnotic, enough to make you forget how cold the walls must feel if you pressed your palm against them. You know the candles won't last all night, they'll gutter out one by one, leaving only the dim glow of embers to hold the dark at bay. But that's not the point. This is about claiming a few hours of extra warmth, stealing them from a winter that would rather you have none. When you finally blow them out, the air cools instantly, the shadows rushing back in. Still, the lingering heat on your skin is proof that even a handful of humble flames can push the frost a little farther from your door. And in winter, every inch gained is worth the trouble. There are nights when you simply cannot bring yourself to go through the ritual of undressing for bed. The thought of peeling away your day clothes and facing the raw bite of the air, even for a moment, feels like an unnecessary cruelty. So tonight, you make the choice countless others have made before you sleep exactly as you are, boots and all. It's not laziness. It's a calculation. In a drafty cottage, every second your skin is exposed is another second you're letting the cold claim ground. There's a kind of defiance in keeping your tunic, hose, and even your belt on, wrapping yourself in the day's heat as if it were another blanket. The fabric may be stiff from hours of work, but the body heat trapped inside is worth far more than the small comfort of a change into something cleaner. Among shepherds and travelling traders, this is standard practice in winter. Many say they only remove their outer cloaks, then sleep curled on their sides, knees drawn up, letting the layers act like a cocoon. Some have been known to sleep with their belts still buckled, not for security, but because unbuckling means shifting the fabric enough to let the cold slip in. You remember an older man in the village once telling you that clothes are like fire, you don't throw them away when you need them most. At the time, you'd laughed. Tonight, it makes perfect sense. Sleeping in your day clothes also means you'll be ready for whatever might stir you from rest. A knock at the door, the cry of an animal, the sudden crash of a falling branch on the roof. You can move faster if you're already dressed for the elements. In the quiet danger of winter, readiness is a form of warmth too. Of course, there are drawbacks. The stiffness of your boots means you'll wake with your ankles aching, and the seams of your tunic will dig into your shoulders no matter how you shift. But these are small irritations compared to the deeper ache of cold in your bones. You settle onto your straw bed, cloak thrown over the top, the weight of your clothing pressing down almost as heavily as the blanket itself. Your breath warms the space inside, and soon you feel the familiar, slow spread of heat as your body adjusts to its insulated shell. In certain alpine villages, there's an old belief that sleeping in your travel clothes ensures you'll dream of journeys, some good, some bad. Whether or not that's true, you find the idea oddly comforting tonight. Dreams of moving, of walking through snow under a pale winter sun, are better than dreams of sitting still in a frozen room. The hours pass in a slow rhythm. You wake once to the sound of the wind clawing at the shutters, but you don't have to move far from the bed to check them, they hold firm. You pull your cloak tighter, shift your boots against the straw, and sink back into the warmth you've trapped. By morning, the layers will feel heavier, as if the night has added its own weight to them, but for now, they serve their purpose. You are warm enough to sleep, and that, in the middle of winter, is all that matters. You've learned that not all warmth comes from blankets, fire, or shared beds. Sometimes, it's about what you put into your body before the coldest hours of the night. Tonight, you reach for the clay flask sitting on the shelf, its contents, dark and sweet-smelling, brewed last autumn, and left to mellow in the corner by the hearth. It's a small reserve of ale and mead, made from honey, barley, and a dash of herbs you gathered yourself. When you unstopper the flask, the scent rises instantly, rich, earthy, with a faint sharpness that promises to warm more than just your throat. You pour it into a small wooden cup, swirling it to release the flavor. The liquid glints amber in the candlelight, like trapped sunshine waiting to be freed. Taking the first sip is always a small act of courage. The taste is deep and slightly bitter, the honey smoothing the edges until the warmth rolls down your throat. Within minutes, you can feel it unfurling in your chest, radiating outward to your arms and face. It's not the same as the steady heat of a fire. It's a quicker, more deceptive glow, a kind that masks the cold even if it doesn't fully drive it away. In the port towns, sailors drink stronger spirits for the same reason, though you've heard enough cautionary tales to know how quickly they can turn from comfort to trouble. In the long winters of the north, mulled ale is common, a pot of beer simmered with spices and citrus peels over the hearth, until the whole room smells of warmth. Here you can't afford the spices, but you can recreate the ritual in your own way, heating the drink in a small pot until it steams. There's an old fireside saying, "A sip for courage, a cup for sleep, a flask for regret." You've seen all three play out. Tonight, you keep to the middle path, drinking just enough to feel the stiffness in your shoulders ease and the edge of the wind soften in your mind. As you sip, you remember a winter gathering years ago when the alehouse keeper mixed honey mead with hot milk. The idea had seemed strange, but the result was a drink that felt almost like liquid bread, thick, sweet, and more filling than any cup of ale on its own. Someone claimed it could keep you warm all the way through to dawn. You're half tempted to try it now, but the memory is enough to warm you on its own. Drinking at night isn't without its risks. Too much, and you might wake colder than before, your body tricked into thinking it has heat to spare. But handled carefully, it's another tool in your small arsenal against the frost. You drink slowly, feeling each swallow sink deeper, until the flask is just heavy enough to promise another night's use. When you finally lie down, the warmth inside feels different from the heat of blankets or fire. It's a quieter sort of comfort, humming beneath your ribs like a hidden ember. Outside, the wind is still there, pressing at the walls, but it feels a little less insistent now. You curl under your cloak, the taste of honey lingering on your tongue, and let the night pass in its own time. You wake in the dark to a sound so faint you might have dreamed it, a tiny rustle in the straw at your bedside, followed by a quick, delicate scritch of claws. It's not enough to alarm you. This is winter, after all, and in winter you share your shelter with more than just the people under your roof. The scents and sounds of the seasons seep into the night like another blanket one you didn't exactly ask for. The first thing you notice, as your eyes adjust to the glow of the dying embers, is the smell. Not the clean, dry scent of fresh straw, but the lived-in aroma of damp wool, ash, and the faint musk of something small and alive. You breathe it in slowly. It's the smell of habitation, of bodies and breath, of heat clinging to whatever it can. Some villagers can't stand it, but you've grown used to it, even comforted by it in a strange way. The smells of winter bedding are proof that life is still here, with you sweat in the wool, smoke on the cloth, the grassy undertone of hay that still remembers the sun. Then there's the soundscape. Straw shifts under your weight with a dry sigh whenever you move. Somewhere close by, a mouse makes a cautious dash, pausing when you stir. You've seen them before, quick brown blurs disappearing into the thatch or vanishing into the corners. In summer you might chase them out, but in winter you can't help thinking they're fighting the same battle you are finding any scrap of warmth to call their own. In some farming households, it's said that a few mice in the bedding bring luck, because they indicate the house is warm enough to attract life. Others scoff, claiming that it's a sign you've been too generous with your grain. You're not sure which camp you belong to, but tonight you let the little noises continue without interference. The bedding itself holds a history in its textures. The top layer of wool itches faintly against your skin, but below it the straw is pliable, molded to the shape of your body after weeks of sleeping in the same spot. If you press your hand deeper, you find the cooler, less compacted layers that still hold the crispness of the field. It's like touching two different seasons stacked together, summer, hidden beneath the skin of winter. You remember a story your grandmother told about how she once woke in the middle of the night to find her cat curled up in the straw at her feet, using her body as a windbreak. She said she never slept warmer in her life. You glance toward the foot of your own bed now, half wondering if some small creature has claimed the same spot without you noticing. The air in the cottage carries its own music. Cloth rustles as someone shifts in sleep. A faint whistle of wind threads through the rafters. Every so often, You hear the slow, rhythmic crack of ice shifting on the eaves, followed by the soft pat of meltwater hitting the ground outside. It's not silence exactly, but it's the kind of quiet that makes you aware of every sound you do hear. You lie there, letting these smells and sounds settle into your awareness, thinking of how different they are from summer's www. In the warm months, your nights are filled with chirping insects, the open window breeze, the scent of fresh earth. Winter strips all that away and leaves you with closer, more intimate sensations, the smell of your own hearth smoke, the sound of breathing in the same room, the tactile memory of straw under your back. It's not glamorous. It's not even especially clean. But in its own way, it's reassuring. Every smell, every creak, every rustle is a reminder that you're still here, inside, defended against the season that wants to take you. And when you finally drift back to sleep, those small, familiar details wrap around you as tightly as any blanket. When you wake again, it's not because of noise or dreams, it's the sight of your own breath hanging in the air above you, pale and ghostly in the dim grey that leaks through the shutters. The cup of water you keep by the bed has transformed overnight into a solid block, the surface smooth and white like polished stone. You reach out to touch it, fingertips meeting a cold so sharp it makes you flinch. It's one of those mornings when the night's severity has left a visible calling card. Frozen water indoors is more than an inconvenience, it's a measuring stick for the depth of winter's grip. In years past, old farmers used to say that when the bucket freezes in the corner, you'd best check on your neighbours before the day is through. It means the cold has settled into the bones of every building in the village, seeping into places it doesn't usually reach. You sit up slowly, your joints complaining at the sudden movement. The air in the cottage feels layered coldest at your feet, slightly less cruel around your chest, and sharper again if you stand. It's as if the frost has settled in invisible strata. You keep your blanket draped around your shoulders, not out of laziness but strategy, moving toward the hearth in a swish of heavy cloth. There's a certain eerie beauty in seeing frost creep across the inside of your shutters, delicate fern-like patterns etched by an unseen hand. You catch yourself tracing one with a finger, marvel at how fragile it looks and how immovable it feels under your touch. Outside, the real cold still waits, but it has sent an advance party inside just to remind you who's in charge. In the deeper parts of winter, some villagers put heated stones in their water jugs before bed, a trick to keep them from freezing solid. Others wrap the vessels in layers of cloth and tuck them close to the hearth. You didn't bother last night, perhaps out of tiredness, perhaps because you underestimated the night. Now you regret it, eyeing the block of ice that used to be your drinking water. There's an old tale about a man who tried to break the ice in his bedside jug with the heel of his boot, only to shatter the jug entirely. Since then, the advice passed down has been to thaw, never smash. You take it to heart now, carrying the frozen cup toward the fire like a precious stone, placing it on the hearth ledge to catch the first threads of heat. As the firelight touches the ice, drops begin to bead on its surface, sliding down in thin rivulets before vanishing into the cup's rim. You watch it with more attention than the task deserves, partly because it's hypnotic, partly because there's a quiet relief in seeing something soften under winter's hold, even if it's only water. You've noticed that on mornings like this, the sounds of the world shift. The usual creaks of the cottage are sharper, wood contracting in the cold. Outside, the snow gives off a peculiar squeak underfoot, a noise that only happens when it's far below freezing. Even voices seem changed. Your own breath curls in front of your face when you speak, and words seem to hang in the air a beat longer. In certain northern settlements, people once used the ice in their water vessels as a kind of calendar, counting how many mornings it took to thaw the inside supply, as a measure of how long the deep freeze might last. You wonder if the same trick would work here, or if it's just another piece of weather lore born from long, idle winters. As the cup begins to melt, you finally take a sip. The water is so cold it burns on the way down, and yet it feels like victory to drink it without crunching through a layer of frost first. You wrap your hands around the cup for as long as you can, letting the heat from the hearth seep into both water and skin. Frozen water indoors is a quiet, humbling reminder. No matter how many tricks you learn, the cold will still find ways to surprise you. It slips under doors, through shutters, into your drinking cup. You can fight it, outwit it, even make small wins, but it will always come back. And yet, as you sit there sipping, wrapped in your blanket while the ice surrenders to the fire, you can't help feeling that every thaw, no matter how small, is its own kind of triumph. The fire is still breathing softly in the hearth when you notice the faint, wavering glow of the tallow lamp on the table. You had nearly forgotten you lit it before crawling under the blanket last night, thinking it might give just enough extra light to tend the coals if you woke in the dark. It has burned down low, the wick sitting in a pool of cloudy fat, flickering like a heartbeat. The tallow lamp is humble technology, just a clay dish or shallow metal cup, a length of twisted fiber for a wick, and rendered animal fat as fuel. It smokes if the wick is too long, and gutters if it's too short, so keeping it steady is a kind of small, nightly craft. You dip a finger in the cooling fat, then pinch the wick to trim it, careful not to snuff the flame entirely. The glow steadies, the smoke thins, and the smell, half kitchen, half barnyard, settles back into its familiar place in the room. In some wealthier homes, lamps burn sweet beeswax or even imported oils, their light bright and clean. But here, tallow is what you have, and you're grateful for it. Without it, the corner of the room where you keep your tools would be lost to shadow, and you'd be working blind. You think back to last winter, when a neighbor's lamp cracked in the middle of the night, spilling hot fat onto the floor. The marks are still burned into her rush matting. Since then, you've made a habit of setting your lamp inside a shallow pan, so even if it tips, the damage will be contained. It's one of those lessons you only need to learn once if you survive it. There's a bit of country lore about lamps, too. Some say that if your flame sputters without reason, it's a sign the wind is turning and bad weather's on its way. Others believe that a steady, bright lamp means the cold will ease by morning. You catch yourself watching the flame as if it might actually deliver the day's forecast, though you know the truth is, simpler, steady hands make a steady light. The heat from the lamp is faint but focused. If you cup your hands above it, you can feel the air warming your palms in slow, measured degrees. On truly frigid nights, you've seen people hunch over their lamps as though they were campfires, drawing the heat into their faces. You're tempted to do the same now, letting the glow ease the stiffness in your fingers. Maintaining the lamp is part necessity, part ritual. Every few hours you need to feed the wick a little more fat, scraping the solid pieces from the edge of the dish and letting them slide down into the pool where they melt. You've grown adept at doing it half asleep, by touch alone. The movement's as practiced as stoking the hearth. In some regions, you've heard, people save the first drip of melted tallow each night for polishing leather, believing it somehow carries the day's warmth into whatever it touches. You tried it once on your boots. Whether it made them any warmer you can't say, but the leather softened in a way that felt like kindness to your feet. The lamp's circle of light stretches just far enough to illuminate your bedding, your cup, and the corner where the door latch glints. Outside that halo, the darkness is thick and silent, pressing in like snow-laden clouds. The lamp makes a boundary a fragile one, perhaps, but enough to make you feel that inside this ring of light and faint warmth, you are defended. You know the tallow will run out soon. When it does, the flame will falter, shrink, and finally curl into a wisp of smoke, leaving only the slow breath of the hearth to keep the dark from swallowing the room. But until then, you'll guard the lamp, tending its small, stubborn light as you tend your own warmth, patiently, deliberately, against the deep, waiting cold. There are nights when the wind claws at the shutters so fiercely that you can't convince yourself the embers will hold until morning. Tonight feels like one of those. You crouch by the hearth, hands hovering over the faint glow, weighing the risk of building an overnight blaze. It's not a choice you make lightly. Keeping a fire going while you sleep is a gamble every peasant knows. One bad shift of a log, one flying spark, and your carefully hoarded shelter could vanish in smoke before dawn. Still, the thought of waking to ice on your blanket is enough to tip the balance. You stack two stout logs on the embers, laying them so they catch slowly, not in a rush. Over them, you scatter a handful of dry twigs, listening for that small, promising crackle. The fire answers with a deepening glow, shadows on the wall twitching like startled birds. In the upland villages, it's common to bank a fire overnight by covering the hot coals with a layer of ash, starving them of air just enough to keep them smouldering until morning. But here, where the nights bite harder and drafts find their way through every seam, people sometimes defy caution and let the flames live on. The trick, passed quietly from one household to another, is to keep the blaze low enough to radiate warmth, not enough to leap from its bed of stone. You've heard the cautionary tales. A cousin of yours once swore he woke to find a hole burned clear through his blanket where a spark had landed. Another man in the next hamlet lost an entire wall to a fire that started in the night, the smoke choking everyone awake before they had time to think. Yet, there's a kind of peace in knowing that while you sleep, something in the room is keeping watch. The fire's light reaches farther than the tallow lamps ever could. It paints the rushes on the floor in stripes of gold and black, turns the iron pot on its hook into a shape of shadow and shine. You shift your bedding closer, letting the edge of the cloak nearest the hearth grow pleasantly warm. There's a comfort in this nearness, but you still keep your feet wrapped and your hands covered. No one trusts a winter fire to do all the work. Some people say that a night fire changes your dreams, that the flicker of light across your closed eyes draws your mind into stranger places. You can't swear to that, but you do remember nights with the hearth alive when sleep seemed deeper, heavier, as though the fire itself was keeping time for your breathing. Once the logs have settled into a steady burn, you kneel and use the iron poker to shift a glowing coal toward the front, just enough to light the room if you stir before dawn. It's not as bright as a candle, but it's enough to see the latch on the door, the shape of your boots, the outline of the water jug. Outside, the wind howls and retreats in turns, like a predator pacing at the edge of camp. Inside, the fire cracks softly, its own quiet language of settling wood and shifting ash. You lie back under your blanket, eyes half open, watching the red cores of the logs pulse with each breath of air they take from the room. Keeping a night fire isn't about chasing away the cold entirely. You know better than to think that's possible. It's about holding a line, drawing a warm, flickering boundary the frost cannot cross while you sleep. And when the morning comes, if the logs have burned down to a thick bed of embers, you'll greet them like old friends who kept vigil through the longest hours. The fire has burned down to a low, steady glow by the time you're ready to lie down again. But before you do, there's one more ritual whispered words meant for no one but the dark. You've done it since you were a child, though back then it was more imitation than belief. Now, after enough winters, you understand why people in the village speak to the night before sleep. You kneel near the hearth, feeling the prickle of heat on your cheeks, and murmur the old lines. They're not grand prayers, just simple phrases asking for a safe night, for the cold to pass you by, for the frost not to take hold in your chest. Some say these words are just habit, no different from checking the door latch or banking the fire. Others quietly, when no one else is listening, admit they believe the night has a will of its own and can be persuaded to leave you in peace. There's a little wooden cross on the wall, darkened with age, that you touch before settling in. In some homes, it's a carved figure of a saint. In others, a small stone with markings that mean something only to the family. Here, it's the cross, hung by your grandfather, who claimed it kept the worst of the winter fevers away. Whether that's true or not, it feels wrong to ignore it. In other villages, people leave small offerings at the threshold before bed. A crust of bread, a cup of milk, even a sprig of dried herbs meant to placate spirits or ensure good fortune in the coming day. You've seen it work both ways. Houses where the offering is gone by morning and the family swears the weather seemed kinder, and others where nothing was touched and the wind howled louder than before. You think of the old woman who lives by the stream, the one who insists she can call the warmth back into a room by chanting over the fire. You've never seen her do it, but you've heard enough about her midwinter gatherings, half blessing, half neighborhood gossip, to know that in the deep cold, people will try anything that feels like an act of resistance. When you finally slip under your blanket, you keep your eyes closed and repeat one last line to yourself, almost like a lullaby. It's not that you expect divine intervention, winter doesn't bargain, but the rhythm of the words slows your breathing, loosens the knot in your shoulders. Some historians might dismiss these nighttime invocations as nothing more than superstition born of hardship. But you've lived enough winters to know that sometimes survival is as much about the mind as the body. If speaking to the night helps you feel a fraction safer, then it's worth the breath it takes. The fire hisses softly as a coal shifts, and you imagine your whispered words rising with the smoke, slipping into the rafters, seeping out through the roof to mingle with the stars. Maybe they vanish there, meaningless. Or maybe, just maybe, they hang in the air like a shield around the small space you call home. You pull the cloak tight, one hand still curled near your face, and let the warmth of the embers and the comfort of the ritual carry you into sleep. Outside, the wind prowls. Inside, you've done what you can to hold it at the threshold. The rest is up to the night. By the time the sky turns the pale, flat grey of late morning, you've already decided it's a day for sealing the floor. The rushes scattered across it have grown brittle with age. Their once bright green long faded to the colour of straw left too long in the sun. They still serve their purpose, though another layer between you and the cold earth that lies beneath the packed dirt floor. You gather a fresh bundle from the stack in the corner. Cutting them last summer was hard work, slogging through wet ground with a sickle, but this is when the labour pays off. Fresh rushes are flexible, clean-smelling, and dense enough to trap pockets of air beneath them. You start by sweeping away the old ones, sending a small storm of dust motes swirling into the light from the open door. The air smells faintly of earth and something musty, but it feels good to clear it out. Once the floor is bare, you can feel just how cold it is, the chill rising straight into your boots, as if the ground itself is trying to pull the heat from you. You lay the new rushes in overlapping layers, working from one wall to the other, weaving them so there are no gaps. Each step feels quieter now, the hollow thump of bare earth replaced by a muted rustle. In wealthier homes, floors might be covered with woven mats or even planks, but here, rushes have always been the answer. They insulate, they soften the floor for sleeping or sitting, and when they're fresh, they even improve the air. You remember hearing about great halls in the cities where the rushes were mixed with herbs like lavender or rosemary, not for warmth but for fragrance. You have neither today, but the clean scent of green stalks is welcome enough. The work has a rhythm to it. Lift a bundle, shake it out, lay it flat, press it down with the side of your foot. It warms you in more ways than one. You think about how the cold creeps into a room from every direction, through walls, through the roof, and especially from the ground. Even with a good fire, your toes will find the cold spots if you leave the floor bare. By the time you finish, the room feels different. The new rushes are springy underfoot, and the faint, fresh scent mingles with the ever-present wood smoke. You kneel to test the difference, resting your palm on the layered stalks. The floor feels less like a stone and more like a padded bench, the kind of surface that will hold warmth from the fire longer. Some people in the village joke that the floor is the first blanket you should make before winter comes. They're not wrong. If you trap warmth at the ground, everything above it feels easier to heat. You've noticed that on nights after you change the rushes, you sleep a little deeper, the air near the bed less sharp. When you sit back on your heels, you take a moment just to listen. The sound of your movements has changed. Your steps now have a whispering quality instead of a hard crunch. It's a small reminder that winter survival is built from dozens of these tiny changes, each one shaving a little more cold away from your life. You stand, brush off your hands, and feel a quiet satisfaction. Outside, the frost is still biting at the world, but in here, you've stolen back another inch of ground from it. Tonight, when you lie down, the floor beneath you will be holding its own against the cold, and you'll be able to feel it. By the time you step outside for water, the air has the peculiar clarity that comes after several days of hard frost. Every sound is sharper boots crunching on the snow, the faint crackle of ice shifting in the stream, even the distant voices of neighbors carrying farther than they should. And as always, the moment you reach the well, the small crowd is already there, exchanging the day's first words and the morning's coldest gossip. You know this ritual well. People huddle with their cloaks wrapped tight, stamping their feet to keep the blood moving, while their buckets sit in line, waiting for the rope and winch. It's not just about the water, it's about measuring the night by how everyone else fared. Who had ice inside their windows? Whose fire refused to stay lit? Who's still thawing out their bread before they can eat? You take your place, pulling your hood forward against the wind. The well crank groans as someone hauls up a bucket, the water inside glittering in the pale winter light. A neighbor leans in to tell you about a hen that froze in its coop during the night, her tone equal parts shock and grim pride at surviving herself. Another man brags that his hearth burned all the way till morning, though someone else points out that he's already burned through half his winter woodpile. Stories pass back and forth in this little circle as steadily as the buckets of water. Some are practical warnings, reminders to keep your water vessels near the hearth, or to double-check the moss plugging the eaves. Others are half-myth, like the claim that the frost is hunting from the hills and will be harsher until it drives out the last of the foxes. You listen without interrupting, letting the words layer over you like extra clothing. There's a comfort in this exchange, even when it's just repetition. In summer, people scatter to their fields trades without much talk. In winter, the well becomes the village's morning fire. Everyone takes a turn warming themselves on the glow of shared experience, even if it's just commiseration. When your turn comes, you lower the bucket carefully. The rope bites at your palms through your mittens, stiff with cold, but the rhythm of the work steadies you. The water rises slowly, its surface rimmed with a thin, fragile crust of ice that breaks the moment it meets the air. You can feel the cold radiating from it as you lift it to the lip of the well. A woman beside you offers a nod of respect you've managed not to spill, which is no small feat in gloves stiff as boards. You pour the water into your own container, watching the steam curl upward where it meets the warmer air of your cloak. More news passes before you leave. Someone's goat gave birth early. A cousin in the next village has taken to sleeping in the bakehouse to keep warm, and there's word of a cart of salt fish arriving before the next market day. None of it changes the fact that the frost is still deep and stubborn, but it feels better to walk home with more than just water in your hands. Back at the cottage, you set the bucket down near the hearth, so it won't freeze before evening. You can still hear echoes of the wellside chatter in your mind, the rhythm of voices and laughter. Winter is long, but moments like these shared breath in cold air, words traded like coals from one fire to another, make it feel a little shorter. The bucket of water by the hearth is still liquid when you return from checking the barn, but you know that won't last forever. Tonight will be another bitter one, and there's no point pretending otherwise. That's why you've already made your choice. You won't sleep alone in the cottage. You'll take your blanket and bedding to the great hall in the center of the village, where the air is thick with heat, breath, and the heavy smell of too many people crammed together for the same reason. The hall is nothing grand. It's a long, timbered building with smoke-darkened beams and benches pushed against the walls to make space for sleeping pallets. By day, it's used for meetings, feasts, and storing tools when the weather turns foul. By night, in the deep cold, it becomes the village's largest shared hearth. When you step inside, the first thing you notice is the weight of the heat. It's not clean or crisp like stepping into sunlight, but dense, like a woolen cloak thrown over your entire body. A row of fires burns low along the central hearth trench, each one tended by a different household. Sparks snap lazily upward into the dim haze beneath the rafters. The floor is covered in a patchwork of rushes, old rugs, and scraps of cloth to soften the ground and trap warmth. You stake out a space along the far wall, unrolling your blanket beside two older neighbors who greet you with a nod. They've already tucked themselves in, their cloaks pulled up to their ears. Around you, the room hums with the sounds of shifting bodies, muffled conversation, and the occasional burst of laughter. Children dart between the pallets until a sharp word from their mother sends them scurrying under a blanket. There's an old belief that sleeping in a communal space like this keeps illness at bay during the hardest freezes, because the shared heat stops the damp air from settling in your lungs. Whether that's true or not, you can feel the difference almost immediately. The air here is warmer than your cottage has been in weeks, though it's tinged with the smell of wood smoke, unwashed wool, and cooking that's been done earlier in the day. A man across the hall produces a small pot of soup from the edge of his fire, offering it to anyone nearby. You take a ladleful and sip slowly, letting the warmth spread through your chest. In return, you share a hunk of bread from your satchel. Exchanges like this happen without thought. Everyone understands that keeping each other fed and warm is as much self-preservation as generosity. As the fires sink into embers, the voices fade. One by one, people curl tighter into their blankets. The room becomes a mass of slow, steady breathing, the collective body heat rising like an invisible quilt to press against the rafters. Somewhere near the door, a dog sighs and shifts on its side, a reminder that the warmth here belongs to every living thing, not just the humans. You close your eyes, feeling the difference between this and the solitude of your cottage. The cold is still outside, pressing against the walls, but in here, surrounded by others, it doesn't feel quite as sharp. You think of the old saying, one log will burn, but many logs will blaze. Tonight, you're one of those logs, part of a greater fire, and the night will have to fight harder to get through. You wake in the great hall before dawn, not from the cold, but from the soft, steady drip of water hitting the rushes near your head. When you blink into the half-dark, you see at the edges of the thatched roof are rimmed with ice, and the slow warmth rising from the sleeping crowd has begun to melt the frost above. Tiny droplets gather and fall, landing on cloaks, blankets, and the occasional unlucky face. It's the trade you make in a place like this. Thatch is good for shedding rain in summer, but in winter, when frost settles thick as wool on the roof, it becomes a slow, unpredictable leak. The rafters above are dark with old stains, marks left by years of this same thaw. No one complains. A little dampness is a small price for a night of shared heat. Still, you shift your bedding a few inches to avoid the worst of it. In your own cottage, you've fought these same leaks, patching the thatch with spare bundles of reed or twisting tufts of straw into gaps where the snow press in. Some villagers hang scraps of cloth under the worst spots, catching the melt before it can soak the bed. Others simply keep a bucket nearby, letting the slow drip mark the hours until morning. You pull your cloak tighter and glance around the hall. A few others are awake, brushing frost melt from their blankets. One old man sits up and runs a hand along his damp hair, muttering something about winter's handshake. Near the fires, people are already poking the embers to life, their breath curling in the chill that still clings to the floor despite the warmth above. There's a certain camaraderie in this damp inconvenience. Someone passes around a wooden mug of warm ale, the steam curling upward like another ghost of the night. A woman near the door wrings out the corner of her blanket, then laughs when a drop splashes onto her neighbour's face. The laughter spreads, as if mocking the cold makes it less bold. Outside, you know the frost is still heavy on the roofs, the air sharp enough to sting your lungs. Inside, the melt is a reminder that even winter's grip can loosen under enough shared heat. But it's also a warning too much warmth trapped under thatch can rot the reed before spring. You've seen it happen in cottages where the snow melt seeped too deep, turned the roof soft and spongy long before the season ended. When you finally step outside, the dawn light catches the ice along the eaves, each droplet trembling before it falls. The roof of the hall glistens like spun glass, beautiful and temporary. You take a long breath, the air biting but clean, and think about how, even in the coldest months, the line between survival and discomfort is thin, and sometimes marked only by the slow rhythm of meltwater falling onto the floor. Back in your own cottage that evening, the cold is waiting for you like an uninvited guest who's made itself comfortable. The fire has long since died, and the air feels sharper than it did outside, as if the walls themselves have been holding on to the frost. You don't have the luxury of easing into the night slowly, you reach straight for the thickest pelt you own. It's not the soft, supple leather the wealthy wear, tanned to perfection and lined with fur so fine it shines. This is a stiff, heavy hide from a deer taken last autumn, tanned just well enough to keep it from cracking. The fur is coarse, uneven in patches, but when you drape it over yourself, the heat stays in. It has a faint, musky scent that never quite leaves, no matter how long you hang it in the smoke of hearth. Animal skins are the oldest kind of blanket there is, older than spun wool, older than woven linen. In some of the northernmost settlements, whole beds are made from stacked pelts, reindeer, bear, seal, each one layered for maximum insulation. You've heard travelers say that sleeping under such a mound is like curling inside the body of winter itself, stealing the animal's last warmth for your own. Here, pelts are rarer. You keep yours folded carefully most of the year, saving it for nights when the wind rattles the shutters and you can feel the frost creeping along the floor. Laying it over your straw mattress is like building a second wall between you and the season. The hair traps pockets of air, and the hide underneath blocks the drafts that seep up from below. There's an old belief that certain furs carry more than just heat, that they pass along a measure of the animal's strength or cunning. Hunters will tell you that fox fur keeps you clever, that wolf pelts guard against bad dreams, and that a deerskin, like yours, lends endurance. You've never tested the truth of it, but on the longest nights, you're not above hoping it might be real. The weight of the pelt is its own comfort. It presses you into the bedding, makes you feel anchored against the cold that swirls restlessly just beyond the edge of the bed. You curl into it, letting the coarse fur scratch lightly at your cheek, and breathe in the mingled scents of hide and smoke. Outside, the wind picks up, carrying the thin whine that slips through any gap it finds. You pull the pelt tighter around your shoulders until the sound fades to a distant murmur. In the quiet, you think about how this hide once moved through the forest, warm and alive, braving the same winters that now press against your door. It feels almost like borrowing another creature's memory of survival. When you finally close your eyes, the cold is still there, but held back, pushed to the edges of the room, denied entry to the small circle of heat you've built under the pelt. You know it's a temporary victory, but victories in winter always are. And still, as you drift towards sleep, you can't help feeling that wrapped in this skin, you might just outlast the night. The first light of morning is thin and brittle, sliding through the gaps in the shutters like slivers of cold glass. You rise slowly, every muscle stiff from a night of lying still beneath the pelt. It takes a few moments for your feet to brave the rush-covered floor, and when they do, the chill shoots straight through your soles. There's only one thought in your head now: get the hearth breathing again, before the frost steals the rest of your warmth. The hearth looks almost lifeless at first glance, a grey bed of ash where last night's fire once glowed. But you know better than to trust appearances. You crouch low, using a small iron rod to prod gently through the ash until you find them, a few stubborn embers, dull red at the center, pulsing faintly like the heartbeat of a sleeping animal. They're not much, but they're enough. You pull the tinderbox close, dry moss, curled shavings of wood, a twist of old linen charred on one side. Working quickly, you stack the smallest kindling first, arranging it so the embers can breathe. You lean close and blow, slow and steady, until a faint orange glow sharpens and a thin tongue of flame licks upward. The smell of warming ash hits you immediately, sharp and dusty but alive. In the highlands, people keep a fire going through winter without ever letting it die, passing the responsibility from one member of the household to another, day and night. It's more than convenience, it's an act of respect for the flame, treating it as a living thing that needs tending. You've always liked that idea, and mornings like this prove its worth. Starting from embers is work, but it's gentler than striking flint from scratch in the cold. Once the kindling catches, you add split sticks, then thicker logs, each one drawing a little more breath into the room. Soon, the shadows on the walls soften, replaced by the flicker of new life. You hold your hands out to the heat, feeling the sting of cold in your fingertips give way to a dull, satisfying ache as the blood returns. Reviving the hearth isn't just about the fire, it's a morning ritual that marks the line between night's hardship and day's labors. While the flames gather strength, you set the kettle nearby to warm water for washing, letting the steam curl into the air like a signal that the cottage is awake again. There's a kind of quiet pride in knowing you can coax life from what looked like ashes. It's the same pride your grandparents spoke of when they told you that a house with a fire is a house with a future. Looking at the glow now, you believe them. By the time fire is fully awake, the room feels different. The frost still clings to the shutters, but the air inside is moving, carrying the promise of heat to every corner. You drape the pelt near the hearth to chase out the night's dampness, and for the first time since waking, you let yourself stand still, basking in the simple fact that you've won back the morning. The night ahead will be the longest of the year. The elders in the village have been murmuring about it for days, how the sun will slip away early and leave the land in darkness for hours that seem to stretch beyond reason. You felt its approach in the bite of the wind, in the stillness of the animals, in the way even the strongest fires seem reluctant to burn as brightly. There's no single trick to facing such a night. Instead, you gather every defense you've learned over the long, cold months. You start early, before the sun has even touched the far ridge, sweeping the hearth clear and stacking the best logs within arm's reach. You tuck the largest river stones close to the fire so they can drink in the heat for hours, ready to be wrapped in cloth and slipped under the bedding. Your clothing is chosen with care. Linen shift first, then wool tunic, hose, and the heavy cloak that smells faintly of smoke from a dozen previous nights by the fire. The pelt lies waiting on the bed, its coarse fur ready to trap every scrap of warmth you manage to create. Fresh rushes underfoot give the floor a softer, quieter feel, and you press moss into the gaps near the window frame to stop the smallest of drafts. In the villages farther north, this is the night when people gather in the largest hall, keeping the fires roaring and telling stories until the first faint light appears. Here, you choose the quieter path, keeping to your own cottage but drawing on the same idea. Surround yourself with light and sound to keep the darkness from settling too deep. You place every candle you own on the table, their flames throwing long, swaying shadows that make the walls seem closer, safer. The meal is heavy and deliberate, a thick stew of barley and root vegetables, finished with the last scrap of salted pork. You eat slowly, letting the heat settle deep inside, feeling it radiate outward like a small sun in your chest. Then comes the drink, a cup of ale warmed at the hearth, its sweetness carrying the taste of stored summer. When the light outside fades to nothing, you draw the bedding close to the fire, creating a small fortress of cloth, pelt, and hot stones. The embers glow steadily, each one a watchman for the hours ahead. You keep the poker within reach, ready to stir the coals if they falter. The darkness presses at the shutters, but inside you've built something resilient, layers of warmth, light, and the quiet certainty that you've done everything possible. The hours will still be long, but they'll be filled with the soft rustle of rushes under the pelt, the slow burn of the fire, and the occasional creak of the cottage settling into the cold. You close your eyes knowing the frost will be waiting in the morning, but you also know it will find you ready. And in winter, readiness is its own form of survival. Tonight, you are not just enduring, you are holding your ground. The longest night has passed. Outside, the frost is thick, painting the world in white lace. But the first light of morning is already breaking it apart. You stretch under the weight of the pelt, listening to the softened crackle of the fire as it finishes its watch. In the stillness, you let the rhythm of the night replay itself, the hiss of the hearth when the logs caught, the scent of stew as it thickened, the steady warmth of the stones beneath your feet and later beneath your blankets. You think of how each small choice moss in the window frame, extra layers on your body, candles gathered close, worked together to push the cold back, inch by inch. The wind no longer feels like an enemy this morning. It's simply there, moving over the roof, a reminder